everyone, I am Rebecca from ChemKnits, and most of the time when I'm dyeing yarn, I am using my dye pots on my gas stove. But today, we're going to use an electric hot plate and my full-size 4-inch deep catering steam pan to dye yarn. It's been a while since I've used this, and I have not really used it with the steam pan very much, so I thought that it would be handy to revisit this because I know we all have different setups for dyeing, and this is something that could be portable and therefore very handy. Before we go set up, I would like to give a huge shout out and thank you to today's lab partner, Melanie. Melanie, thank you so much for being my lab partner for this episode of Dyepot Weekly. I really hope you're gonna love the yarn. We are gonna dye the yarn today with 3 colors of Dharma acid dyes: Cabernet, Poinsettia, and Deep Magenta. This should give us a very rich, warm, variegated colorway. This electric burner is Cuisinart brand, and I've had it for a few years. I did have an electric burner previously, but that eventually stopped working, so I bought this one. And Cuisinart's a good kitchen brand, so I think it's gonna hold up well for a long time. Now, these burners can take a really long time to heat up 32 cups in a kettle, but I think lower immersion in a steam pan should not be so bad for heating up in a reasonable period of time. This is my stainless steel 4-inch deep catering steam pan. A lot of dyers will use shorter steam pans, especially if they have a steam cabinet of some kind for heat setting the yarn, but I like having the deeper pan because it allows me to add a lot more water if needed. So while these are definitely not intended to go on top of burners, it works pretty well. If you would like to learn more about any of the equipment or the yarn that I'm using in today's video, I do have affiliate links down in the video description. Today we are going to dye 300 grams of Knit Picks Swish DK yarn. This yarn is 100% superwash merino wool, and I dye it pretty frequently here on the channel. My plan is to start with a fairly low volume of water and then add larger volumes of the dyes to help spread them out a bit over the yarn. But sometimes when I'm starting a project, I have an idea of how I want to proceed at the beginning, and then I edit that as we are going along. But here we go. And I did pre-soak this yarn overnight in just some plain tap water. The heat is still off because we don't have any water in here. I'm bringing over 8 cups of water with 2 tablespoons of white vinegar. And I want to add just enough to cover the yarn, which actually I think will be the entire 8 cups this time. Sometimes you may not need quite as much water, and if I was going to do something with speckles, I would use less water, but I don't want the yarn to be super compressed, and so this will help us get a little bit more coverage as we are adding our colors. But also, as we add our colors, we will be increasing the volume. I am going to make more water with 8 cups of water and 2 tablespoons of white vinegar to have on hand in case I need to use a turkey baster and add liquid around the edges. And as for our colors, I am going to be doing a lot of this by feel, adding in, you know, that deep in the cup of the poinsettia, and probably, and I need to shake this up really, really well, because sometimes there might be some particles that come out of solution and head towards the bottom of the container. And so that is not ideal, but it's a reason why a lot of times I recommend making up stocks fresh. But that's a little bit more Deep Magenta. But then for the Cabernet, I am going to use a little bit. Cabernet is a very, very pigmented color, and a little bit goes a long way. We're going to be dyeing by feel today, which means that I will add more or less color as needed to dye the yarn. And actually, I normally don't mix acid in with the dyes, because I prefer to have that in with the yarn. But I'm going to take some of this water with the ratio of 8 cups of water and 2 tablespoons of white vinegar and add that to these cups. So that way, when I'm adding water, I'm not diluting the amount of acid that we have present. And now I am actually going to plug in the burners. Now, one thing you do want to make sure is that you do keep things in the off position when you're not using it. And I recommend with any hot plate, unplug it when you're not using it. It does take a long time to cool off, which is another thing that you should consider. Unlike the stove, where you could turn off the heat and there might be a little bit of heat in like the grate over the burners, but this doesn't cool off nearly as quickly. And so I'm gonna keep an eye on this, and we're gonna wait until we get nice and steamy to add the color. One other potential downside to the electric burner is that when I adjust the heat, I can't also adjust the place where it's going. Because if a gas burner is this big, if the heat's on high, it spreads out further. And so the heat in here may be more localized. So I'm trying to move the yarn to help distribute the heat, because after just a couple minutes we are very warm, like right over the middle of the burners. We will keep our eyes on this. Okay, the heat is on high, and I'm going to reduce it to more of a 3, but you can see that we are very, very warm over there. And so again, I'm trying to move the yarn to help distribute the heat. And since that back burner is larger, right? Yes, since it's larger, I'm also gonna flip the pan around so that way we can give more heat over here, because things are still, while they're getting warm, they're still fairly cool towards the outsides. Yeah, which is funny. I don't often check the temperature of various areas when I'm steaming on the stovetop, but I know that things tend to be warm all around, and sometimes I can feel the heat on the sides of the pan. I'm just being extra thorough here today. But it's only been a couple of minutes since my last check-in, so overall this is going fairly quickly. Okay, I am seeing steam in more places, so what I'm gonna do, sort of move the yarn down, let that water sort of soak all over that edge skein, and then soak this other edge skein. And we're gonna go for it, even knowing that the heat is probably somewhat uneven. And we will see what we end up with. I will add that I have the hot plate on top of a shower curtain, but no hot seems to go beneath the hot plate, which is good. That's very good. I am gonna start with some of this Cabernet color. It is a very pretty color. I've added about half of what I've mixed so far, and I am adding it to the yarn. And oh right, there is acid in there as well. And so there are differences when doing this between the different skeins. They aren't going to be perfectly identical. I'm going to add a little bit more to this medium area. And the reason why I'm pushing is to help the color go through a couple of layers of the yarn. We will need to flip and move the yarn around multiple times, but this helps sort of increase the softness that we see. Okay, next I'm coming in with our Poinsettia, which is this beautiful, beautiful red. Ooh, I really, really like it. Cherry Bomb is a red I use a lot, but I always forget how much I love Poinsettia. I think this is the one that I used for that watermelon colorway I did many years, maybe last summer as part of the ChemKnits dialogue. But now I'm gonna add a little bit more red into this intermediate area. And I used more of the Cabernet than I have the Poinsettia, but the Poinsettia I started with more of that 1% stock solution. And then I'm gonna add little bits of the Cabernet here just to sort of blend it a little bit. See, if I see a little bit of white, I want to add some color there. The goal is not to have something that is perfectly repeating. There is going to be a repeating element to this kind of colorway, so that's just worth keeping in mind. And now our Deep Magenta. Of all of our colors, this one is technically a primary color with Dharma. And I can actually move the yarn down. I'm like, where is the correct color? And add some of this dye down here to go on the ends. And that's just another way that around the edges you can do that to help spread the color out a little bit more. But you can see that where I poured it on directly, that is absolutely deeper. And so another thing that I could do to help blend the colors together in this intermediate area, I can take some of the Poinsettia mixture and I can take some of our Deep Magenta mixture and combine them, and then in this interface come in with this color. And okay, it's definitely leaning more cherry for sure. That one is more was more pigmented, but in theory you can do things like that to blend them. The red here feels a little bit bluer than what we had over there, but it's still feeling more red than pink. But it is certainly a way if you're trying to like blend and layer colors that you can do that. And so now I'm using like the spoon to just help me spread these colors a little bit more until I'm satisfied with the coverage for this first side. But again, you can see that there's plenty of white left, so we will be doing more layers of color on this yarn, don't you worry. But as the water volume in here increases, the plus is that I'm not worried about burning the yarn in this steam pan, but the minus is that colors will spread more. But I mean, that's not necessarily a big minus, but I am seeing two little spots over here where I would like to add color. And so I'm just taking my spoon with a little bit of dye and putting that on. It looks like a lot of our Cabernet has set. The Deep Magenta has not. And a lot of the Poinsettia has set, but some has not. So what I'm going to do is go and get some tin foil to cover the pan up. This is going to solve two issues. One, it's going to trap the steam in so our pans are not going to dry out. And I just reduced the heat to a 2. It is also going to help by trapping that steam. It's going to help even out the heat in here, which will help those colors set. But I'm going to go ahead and leave this for, I think, 10 minutes, and then we will come back to flip the yarn and dye the other side. Okay, it has been 10 minutes, and woohoo, so steamy. So steamy. Let's check in on the color. There's like a hint of some color left, but I don't think that's going to make a huge impact on our overall colors here. So let's go ahead and flip the yarn. Now you might notice that I do not cover, oh, we have a lot of white, but that's okay. We will be adding more color. You may notice that I don't cover my yarn a lot in my videos. And that is very, very true. And because a lot of times, like, the things I'm doing don't seem to require it. But I just, since things weren't heating that quick or that even, I figured that this was a nice way to help provide more even heat. And I mean, that's the, just in general, something you could do if you need to provide some more even heat. Okay, I'm adding more of our reserve water to the remaining colors that we had mixed originally, just so that way I can spread them a little bit further. And this is again the water with acid in it. Here's a little bit of water in our red pink mixture you made. So you'll notice that the colors as I'm adding them now, and here's our red, are lighter than they were before because we have more water in here. But that's allowing me to spread it a little further. And this is a technique, I'm gonna add more dye, but this is a technique that I will do when we get to the other side. When we move things again and need more color, we will use little bits of the color more diluted to help cover places that are maybe a little bit too pastel. Of course, as I said, right now I am going to want to build this color up here over these larger areas higher, But you can see how this time we took that little bit of dye and we were able to spread it further on here than we were able to do last time. Whoa, the Cabernet is looking rather brown right there. That's interesting. I haven't noticed that before. Hopefully it'll turn more, yes, it's turning more Cabernet colored. I was like, that's a mood, but I think that the heat is shifting it. All right, I'm gonna mix up more of the colors. Here's some more poinsettia. And while I'm doing this, if I think that the color I'm adding is too pigmented, which I don't at the moment, but if I were concerned about that, then something that I could do was to take the diluted color I was already playing with and add it to another cup to add more water to dilute it further. So that is an option. You'll notice I am moving the yarn a bit with it, and I used all that I mixed just now. I will again need more color because I know that there is white beneath the surface, but we will get there. Let's build up our reds a little bit more. And again, this was less red than I had started with before. And I can come in with just our 1% stock and put a little bit on a spoon to sort of spot check without doing a dilution in advance. But it would be easy to add too much color in a spot. So I don't necessarily recommend that, but it's not a bad thing. And then with our magenta, that one I think I've probably got too much of that color mixed, but you know, we will see as things move on. And you can see that we're getting a lot more water now, and so that will help colors move further down. But actually, before even flipping, I could come over and again, I'm going to add a couple drops of dye onto my spoon. So this way I can, whoop. Okay, you are leaking. That is not what I wanted you to do. So maybe not so good as it is leaking, but let's try to rinse off the bottle. Oh my, a lot is leaking there. A lot of leaking. Okay, that could work well in theory, but with the bottle leaking, maybe not ideal. But you could see that that is a way that I can, as we like check and move the yarn, it is a way to spot check. And so I will go ahead and try this. Oh wait, the magenta I have plenty of, so I don't need to try that with a deep magenta, but I can come in with the spoon and add color to the spots I feel like need it now. You know, there's no reason why I have to wait for a flip to do that later. And so it's just a way to sort of focus on the color as we're going. Because that poinsettia was leaking, I can add some of it undiluted to a cup and then grab some up with a Pasteur pipette to help add the color in on spots. And so by having my spoon here, I'm rather than letting the drop hit the yarn first, it's hitting the spoon in other water, so I can spread it out a bit more to help get that coverage on areas that I think may need it. And so it's working pretty well. I'm gonna do the same thing with some of the Cabernet and spot check. This is not something that I have tried specifically before, but when thinking about it, if I'm gonna pour large volumes on, that'll make some differences that we have even greater. And so if I notice like a small area where I think we may want more color, this is a way, see like in there, that we can do it before a flip to just help get it where we want that color. And I'm excited with where this is going. There is like a depth disconnect in here. We've got bright going into deeper, but I think that I really like the way that these colors are layering together. And now I am going to cover this, and we will wait approximately 10 minutes before moving the yarn around to see where else we may need more color. So move our lid, and we can move the yarn to see where we still may want more color. Yes. The good news, as I flip it, is that our coverage is pretty good. There are only small spots, but I may need to do a third round of checking as time goes on, because part of the problem is that some yarn ends up on top of other yarn, and so then that can make things harder to see. But let's see. Goal is to expose any areas where I would want more color. And I'm realizing that through this current stage of the dyeing process, I'm talking a lot more about the actual dyeing of the yarn than I am talking about the steam pan, which honestly is a very good thing, given that I am not like complaining about the steam pan here. Now, I am doing the drop technique to spot add color where I might want it some, but another choice would be to just dilute it in a very large volume of water, as well as we had discussed. And I will check some of these areas again towards the end. We will flip again and look for any other areas that we think could use some spot checking. But overall, this is working great. There are a lot of dyers that will use things like more traditional catering pans that these types of trays fit in. So I believe that those are heated with a water bath, so therefore you wouldn't worry as much about burning because there wouldn't be points with as hot contact, if that makes sense. And so those are also, I would say, good choices for dyeing yarn. I've just never tried one of those before. But you could have something set up with multiple burners, and I know a lot of dyers who will do that, and so then they can do more pans at once. Whereas I'm typically limited to like 2 pans at a time because of my stove. But with this going pretty well, it's a little bit different than when I'm using my stovetop because I know I don't have as much control over the heat, but it's still working well. So therefore, well, I actually only have 2 of these 4-inch catering steam pans at this current moment, but in theory I could get more and therefore use more. The thing keeping me from doing more is not the lack of burner space anymore. So anyway, that's just worth keeping in mind as you are considering equipment that you may want for dyeing yarn. And I have to say, I am very, very pleased with this eyedroppery way. And with the magenta, I mean, I've got all this mixed, so I may as well use it and pour it over some of these areas that I feel like could use a little bit more color. But I can spot check with this towards the end as well. So yeah, I'm thrilled with the way that this colorway is coming together. I am pleased with the performance of the steam pan so much that, you know, I'm not thinking about the steam pan as much anymore. And so I'm gonna cover this and we'll wait, I guess, another 10 minutes. You can buy covers for these steam pans. You don't have to use foil, but I didn't buy lids, and so therefore foil is a way I can do it, and I can actually rinse this off and reuse this foil for other projects to recycle it, so that way it's not as much waste. I think I mentioned earlier on that a lot of different dyers use different heat sources. Some of us are using gas stovetops or maybe even electric stovetops. Some people use portable burners. some use steam tables, and some use proofing cabinets that are often used by bakers to bake bread. And so those are used by dyers where you can heat many pans of yarn at the same time. And ultimately, I think the type of heat source you're using depends on the quantity of yarn that you're dyeing. So if you're going from small batches to larger batches, you may need a lot more burner kind of setups and tables, electrical upgrades required to run that many appliances. But those are options certainly as well. I don't currently have plans to test out some of these other heat sources because they would require me to purchase equipment that I don't have, and that can get really expensive. But maybe someday I'll do collaborations with some other dyers who may let me try out their equipment or something like that. So I don't know, but just, I guess I'm talking about this so that way you guys can be aware that there are lots of different options, and what you decide to use may depend on the dyeing space that you have accessible to you. But yeah, I'm not sure if I were to set up my own dyeing studio, if I would want to have tables with multiple steam pans where I could have access to it in real time, or if I would want some kind of proofing cabinet. I think it would really depend on how much I think I might scale up some of the dyeing that I'm doing, because ultimately I dye small batches because I'm also filming them. So these are all things to consider and think about. But anyway, let's get back to the yarn. These colors are building up so well. So now what I'm doing is trying to find any and all areas where I want more color. And this is something that in theory I may have to go through a couple of times, especially with me doing like smaller spot checks. Overall, the coverage is pretty good, but there are, you know, some areas where we haven't had quite as much coverage. And so I am gonna go ahead and spot check a bunch of these as I have been doing over, I guess, the last portion of the video. So no, this won't give as much coverage. And so if these areas run like a bit deeper, maybe it's not gonna help get that. But overall, I think that this has been working fairly nicely. And yeah, I guess this is what I will be doing to try to finish this up. One other thing I really like about having this pan on my countertop is that I can access the yarn from the side versus just the long end like I can when I'm on the stove. And so that is one thing that can be a perk. The portable burner can be moved around so that way you can use it in the configuration that best works for you. But anyway, I continued to spot check the yarn, waiting about 10 minutes before drastically moving the yarn to see if there were any more spots where I wanted more color. All right, I think I just added our final color, and I'm gonna go ahead and add more acid. 3, 4, just add a total of 6 tablespoons of white vinegar. And now I am going to cover this and let it heat for 30 minutes from the time I last added dye. But Melanie, I really hope you like the way that this colorway is going. Right, it has been 30 minutes. I'm gonna turn the burners off and unplug the system. So that way we know that it is off. And let's see how we're doing. I mean, that looks really clear. There's like a hint of color, but I also see some staining over there. So I am going to remove the yarn. Ooh, there are some lighter patches. I could have kept like spot checking this for a really long time, but I'm happy with the color. I'm gonna set this aside to cool completely so we can wash it. As for our steam pan, if I was going to be doing a leave no dye behind now, then I would use this same water. I have saved some leftover dye from this project. It's a mixture of all 3 colors, and I'll save that for a leave no dye behind that I'll film later this week. But for the pan, I'm gonna take it to the sink to wash it. There is some film of color I see around the edge. And then as for our hot plate, it is pretty warm. Like I can touch the edges, but it's been on for a while. And so the rubber has kept the table beneath it nice and cool because air can pass underneath it. But you want to be careful because it is still very, very hot and it'll take time to cool. So probably what I will do is wait 20 minutes or so before trying to move it somewhere, because that way I won't risk burning myself, but I can let it cool completely before I store it. Let's wash our yarn. This is so bright. Oh no, that was accidentally hot water. I was like, what? That was accidentally hot water. All right, in theory, we want to wash on cold. But the good news is that I'm not seeing any color come out. And so that is great news. On the monitor it almost looked like something, but I didn't see any in person. So we'll see what happens when we add some dish soap. All right, let's see. That, my friends, is glorious, especially since we have such a bold pink and red in here. So I'm gonna go ahead and rinse out the soap, put all the yarn through my spin dryer, and then hang it up to dry so we can take a peek at what it looks like all finished up. Oh, Melanie, this colorway is a lot of fun. There are some lighter patches in here where we got just a little shallow amount of color and areas that are deeper, but I still think that it is really, really fun. Part of me, just a small part of me, wishes that I had applied the dye to the yarn while cool, so that way I could have worked it through and then heated it on the hot plate. But since this video was focusing on the hot plate and using that as a method for dyeing yarn inside, I'm very satisfied with how it worked as the tool for heating the yarn. And so that was more of the focus. But I am very happy with the color we ended up with. I think I usually dye a lot more sort of random color placement, but it is fun to do something that is more repeating once in a while. And I'm really glad that while we have tonal variation within each of the colors, I mean, we can see lighter patches in here, I'm glad that the transition between the colors is still soft, that there is a softness to the entire colorway as a whole, because that is ultimately something that I did really, really want with this color. I didn't want sort of harsh transitions. Whenever I list yarn in my Etsy shop, ChemKnits Creations, in case you're curious and want to go check it out, I always include flat lays, or I try to at least include flat lays of the yarn, so you can see what the skein of yarn looks like as it was dyed. And I do that because when the yarn is twisted up, depending on how you twist it, it can be hard to tell what kind of colorway it is. Because you know that these are the same colorway. I'll remove the third. But in one, I had grouped the colors together as I was twisting, and the other, I didn't. And so it could be hard to know, really in either of these circumstances, but maybe especially this one, how big each of the respective color repeats are. Or even here, it could be hard to know, okay, do we have a colorway that goes red, pink, purple? And then just those three colors, or does it go, red, purple, pink, purple, red? You don't know what the color repeats look like. And so that is why I think it is so important to show some kind of flat lay, so then you can get a sense of the overall proportion of different colors and think about how you might want to use the yarn. And so just like rescaining or not rescaining, which is a debate that I have shared here before, how you choose to twist up the colors and how you choose to orient that skein is a choice that you can make as well. Melanie, I want to give you another huge thank you for being my lab partner for this episode of Dyepot Weekly. I had a blast creating this colorway. I love these three colors together, and I really hope you're going to love it too. Thank you, Melanie, for being my lab partner. to bring this back to the focus of the video, and that is my Cuisinart hot plate. It works really well for dyeing yarn. The plus side is that I can bring it anywhere I want to dye the yarn, so therefore I'm not limited to the stove in my kitchen. The downside is that it does take significantly longer to heat up and to cool off in the end. And so if you're dyeing something where you need to be really sensitive with how much you're heating it, it's probably worth having some kind of hot pads nearby so you can remove the pan if things are getting too hot and you really want to reduce the temperature on the yarn a little bit faster. One other heat source that I get requested to investigate a lot is the oven. The biggest reason why I don't really use the oven for dyeing yarn is that it is hard to clean the oven, and I don't want to use commercial dyes in the oven in the event that there is a spill or something like that. And so that's just a personal choice that I make. Secondly, if say I'm using all food safe dyes, there is a greater chance that you could burn your yarn when it's in the oven. If you don't have enough water, if there's too much evaporation, you could toast it. It's harder to film in the oven because you can't really get the camera in there. And when you need to bring things in and out of the oven, that it does involve movement both of the yarn and any liquid that is in the pan. And so in that process, it could alter the colorway that you're creating. Now, those are a lot of cons, but those are the reasons why I don't use it. But you probably could get more even heat, and so that could be helpful as well. But I don't really have any plans to do more of that at all at the moment. I will, however, be using this hot plate a lot more. In fact, today I was dyeing up some more yarn for the Spring Mini Skein mini-series. And as the sets this year include 6 20-gram mini skeins, it meant that I could have 3 different surfaces for dyeing some of the yarn, which meant that what I was re-dyeing I could do in 2 steps versus 3, because I tend to be more limited to the amount of burner space I have on the stove. I could have everything going on at once, and it meant the dyeing more yarn up, it meant it went a lot faster because I had another spot to apply heat to the yarn. And so I'm very, very happy with that. And go and check out the SMSMS listing. There are more sets available on a lot of different yarn bases. I'll have a link to that and all kinds of other stuff down in the video description. I am Rebecca from ChemKnits, and thank you so much for watching.